Nazanin, it's so good to be here and to speak to you again. But you haven't acted now for a couple of years because you've committed your life to this cause, focusing on Iranian women, providing and creating some kind of platform outside of the country in memory of not just Mahsa Amini, but so many others who have lost their lives in the last couple of years.
Yes, it's good to be with you, Yalda. Yes, as of September 2022, I came off of promoting a project that I was doing, and then sort of time stood still for me, and I just thought, this is a moment where I need to commit myself. We may never have another chance to sort of throw our full weight and voice behind a cause that could change not only Iran for the better, but the region and the world.
Do you get frustrated because this was once one of the most talked about issues for weeks on end? News headlines, coverage, world leaders, and now, like all things, it's, I guess, the news cycle as well as people's attention moves on.
Yes, I think for any activist it's frustrating because there's that moment where you're relevant and your cause is relevant and your voice matters, and then all of a sudden the people who are risking everything and are continuing to risk everything don't get the attention they deserve. And that's hugely frustrating. I understand that there are so many causes across the world that need our attention. But I think this cause in particular, for 45 years, has been in the spotlight and then it's been sidelined and gone into the shadows. And I think unless we really focus and pay attention, have a long-term strategy in place to empower the people of Iran to towards self-determination, this cycle, this perpetual cycle of extreme oppression and crackdowns on the people, and then, you know, uprising, and then continuous uprising and crackdown will continue, and to no end. And that is what needs to change.
I think what also made this demonstration, this period, so extraordinary was that it was driven by very young, mostly young teenage girls who were protesting in their classrooms, who were out in the streets, putting their lives at risk. A different generation, they were sort of viewed as almost the TikTok generation, who were taking on the clerics, the mullahs. And then it drove women across the board in Iran, and men, to come out onto the streets and ask for change, for something more for themselves after more than four decades.
Yeah, and many people have asked me, what was it about Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman who was arrested and killed in custody and now we know she was killed by the state because the fact-finding mission at the UN said as much. They discovered as much and reported as much. And what was it about her that galvanized an entire nation and resonated, reverberated across the world, where you saw tens of thousands of people on the streets in Europe, in Canada, in America, everywhere really, standing for this cause, for women life freedom? And it's precisely because of the juxtaposition of this young woman who was Kurdish, Sunni Iranian, a minority, member of religious and ethnic minority groups, young, vibrant, her whole life ahead of her, with this gerontocracy of Shia, male, geriatric ruling elite men, essentially, in Iran. And that contrast, that is what this is about. It's this new generation who don't want to be ruled by this gerontocracy, this theocracy. They want secular democracy. And it was women's rights that galvanized it. But now the people of Iran understand the intersectionality of women's rights and every other basic human rights, ethnic minority rights, religious minority rights, LGBTQ rights. The list goes on and on. And that's really what galvanized the nation.
Galvanized the nation, and as you say, reverberated across the globe. I remember speaking to you on a panel with Afghan women, Ukrainian women, there was you, and there was this idea that women's bodies and the freedom of women continues to be politicized, continues to be used for different reasons and causes. And there was this moment, as you say, with Mahsa Amini, which really captured the imagination of people in Iran and externally.
Yeah, and people, I think, initially thought that it was about hair, about covering and the right to
people
show.
cutting their hair.
Yeah, and it was, and that was the outward symbol of it. The mandatory hijab, I think the compulsory hijab is just the outward symbol of the overall oppression that women and girls face in Iran. Of course, they're seen as valued as half the value of men before the law. There's so many rights that they're deprived of. The legal age of marriage was reduced from 18 before 79 to initially 9 for women, for girls. After the revolution, it was later raised to 13, but girls as young as 9 can still be married with the permission of their father or a judge. And you see just how it's an entrenched system that opposes women, that oppresses and segregates women and girls. And that's the difference between women's rights being violated and what we call gender apartheid. And we want this to be recognized under international law because the women of Iran and Afghanistan are oppressed and segregated by entrenched systems of power that favor men. And that's the difference here. Of course that women's rights are violated, and we have so many things we need to work on in the West and other countries around the world. But these are not systemic issues, and they are in countries like Afghanistan and Iran.
As you say, there are a number of issues that we need to cover, including that UN fact-finding mission on Mahsa Amini's death being now described as unlawful. But I want to talk a little bit more about gender apartheid. Are you making any headway? Because you've committed now your life to this cause. You travel around the world, you lobby, you talk to different governments and different groups about recognizing this as a concept that takes place in certain parts of the world. Are they listening?
I mean, I first want to acknowledge the incredible work being done by the Strategic Litigation Center at the Atlantic Council, headed up by Gisounia, who's a Iranian-American human rights lawyer. But what she's managed to do is gather prominent Iranian and Afghan women under one umbrella to demand that gender apartheid, the term gender apartheid, is recognized under international law. We have a unique and time-bound opportunity to have it included in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty that's currently being drafted. If that happens, what it does is it allows us to hold states to account, states like Afghanistan under the Taliban and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and ensure that perpetrators of violence against women, oppression and segregation of women, systemic oppression and segregation of women, are held to account. Right now, there is no accountability mechanism for perpetrators of these crimes against women. And I think that really needs to change. The oppression, segregation, and gender apartheid is essentially a pillar of Afghanistan and the Islamic Republic. If that pillar crumbles, then secular democracy prevailing is far more likely.
There are those who say these sanctions aren't working. Iran, for example, has been isolated for decades. It's seen as a hermit sort of regime. Do you think that's the right way to approach this?
Well, I mean, we've now had a 45-year case study on the Islamic Republic, and there have been moments in time where the world has, in fact, entered dialogue with the regime and frankly tried to appease them. None of it has worked. And now you see the people of Iran bravely go onto the streets in the past year and a half and say, you know, our enemy is right here. You lie that it's America, despite the heavy sanctions, despite the isolation that has existed in recent history. The people of Iran don't want this regime. They want a secular democracy. They've made their voices very clear. And so we have to find a healthy balance of how to hold them to account, as we did with the former Soviet Union, for their human rights abuses, while fulfilling our own foreign policy objectives. But human rights has to be centered in our foreign policy.
Do you feel supported still by the international community with this cause?
Supported, yes. It's gone it's been sidelined somewhat because of other, of course, relevant world events and atrocities and wars. And while that's understandable, I think it's key to understand that if the people of Iran succeed in attaining a secular democracy and that self-determination, if we empower them, just as we did with the people of South Africa against apartheid, that is a geopolitical game changer. That should be a priority for every freedom-loving country in this world. And it currently isn't. Because imagine the ramifications for the region. A free, secular Iran, which is exactly what the people are striving for, stabilizes the region and doesn't pose a threat to countries across the world. And so really, I think we've gotten it wrong for so many years. For 45 years, we've gone between extreme isolation and appeasement, and we haven't found that long-term strategic foreign policy where we find ways to empower the people of Iran, circumvent internet crackdowns, allowing them to organize, to communicate with the outside world when these uprisings happen, allowing them the power of using their voices, providing them with safe havens. Still to this day, the people who need refuge are not getting refuge in Europe, in America. Instead, we're still providing platforms and safe havens, actually opportunities to regime cronies in our universities, in our institutions, allowing them platforms in our media. Those are the wrong voices to be amplifying. We need to be amplifying the voice of the people of Iran.
There are those who say the only way to bring about regime change in this instance is for there to be cracks from within. Are we seeing that?
You know, you're absolutely right, Yalda. There's pressure from below on the streets, which have been happening. There's economic hardship, which is happening, and fissures at the top. There have been some, and it's undeniable that we need more. We need it to be, far, far greater than what we've been seeing. It's not that there hasn't been dissent from the ruling elite. There has been somewhat, but the fissures haven't been widespread enough. Of course, what happens because of the way the system works is anyone who dissents is immediately imprisoned and isn't allowed to run for office. And really, I think what needs to change is for those fissures to take place, we need that international support for the cause of the people, to the degree that the people in the ruling elite understand that the time has passed, for them to be supported. As long as we're extending an olive branch to the regime, as long as we're unfreezing assets and we're negotiating for hostage diplomacy and having them release hostages in exchange for money and for actual prisoners convicted under, due process in our Western countries, then it incentivizes them to continue under this current oppressive system. No one will defect. If we want them to defect, we have to unequivocally have our policies support the people and not the ruling elite.
We are seeing this UN mission now describing Mahsa Amini's death as unlawful, but does it actually change anything on the ground?
That's a great question, Yalda. I was actually in Geneva for the 55th session of the UN Human Rights Council yesterday, where the Special Rapporteur gave his report at the interactive dialogue that happened, and also the fact-finding mission, which was established on Iran, that was established last year, in an unprecedented vote. We were so happy that was established last year. But of course, it took them 6 months just to staff this mission and to get organized and to even have this get underway. And so, yes, we have a positive outcome with the report, which has shown that the state, the Islamic Republic, is responsible for Mahsa's killing and the brutalities that ensued in the crackdowns, the Women Life Freedom protests. But what's happened since then, because the date of the report was until the end of last year, December 2023. And since then, we've had not only continued crackdowns, but the crackdowns have intensified. Protesters are now being executed at a faster rate.
And we're not really hearing about it anymore.
We're not hearing about it. And the reason for that is because it's been sort of, it's in the shadows now. And of course, the world's eyes are now on regional turmoil and war and conflicts. And of course, the Islamic Republic wants that to be the case. They are taking advantage of this moment to really double down on their crackdowns and the oppression of the people. There's a hijab and chastity bill that's could be implemented at any time. And really, what they're waiting for is to see if the mandate of the fact-finding mission will be renewed. Because the crackdowns, as I said, are not only ongoing, they've intensified. Things have gotten worse. We're not hearing about it. So if the fact-finding mission isn't extended to really collect and preserve the atrocities and the information for future criminal proceedings and accountability mechanisms, they will continue. That's what they're waiting for. There's a report that just came out by Amnesty International that shows that there's draconian crackdowns on women that are currently happening. Women, of course, in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, are still taking to the streets of Iran, defying the compulsory hijab, even though they're facing lashes, as in the case of Roya Heshmati, who recently, this year, received 74 lashes for posting a social media photo of her without the compulsory hijab in public. 23-year-old protester Mohammad Qobadlu, despite his diagnosis of bipolar diagnosis, was executed in relation to these protests. The crackdowns are draconian against women. Women are the cars are being impounded and confiscated. Their bank accounts are being frozen. They are being denied jobs. They're being expelled from school for defying the compulsory hijab. It's ongoing. If the fact-finding mission, if the UN member states do not extend the mandate of the fact-finding mission, if they don't renew the mandate of the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, the Islamic Republic will be empowered to continue. So I met with, yesterday in Geneva, I met with delegations from various regions, including Asia, South America, Africa, and also Germany, the Commission on Human Rights for Germany, and to urge them to please extend the mandate of the Human Rights Fact-Finding Mission on Iran, and also the mandate of the Special Rapporteur.
And just finally, I guess, if there was ever to have a sense of hope in this dark moment, I was comforted by the fact that Afghan and Iranian women were standing almost in solidarity with each other, because Iranian women understood all too well what Afghan women were going through when the Taliban swept to power and took away all their rights.
Yeah, Yalda, I was horrified when that happened. For so many of us, it's re-traumatizing, because we saw the number of lives lost and the oppression that our families faced, and many of us faced in exile, who are now in exile. But that is ongoing in Iran. We saw that. We had a glimpse of what the future of the people of Afghanistan would look like under the Taliban. And if the world doesn't pay attention to the plight of the Afghan people, to the plight of the Iranian people, it's a real, not only a moral imperative to do so, it's not only a travesty of justice if we don't, but it will have ripple effects across the world. And as Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere is really a threat to justice everywhere. And we have to heed his advice.
Nazanin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Yalda.